They said I'd never amount to anything, but I left my whole family speechless when I showed up with $1 million deal and a plan to save their legacy. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm 23 years old, and I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. This is the story of how I rose above my own family's mockery, quietly built a financial tech empire, and saved my father's business, not by tearing him down, but by letting the truth speak for itself. I grew up under the scorching South Carolina sun, where success was measured by calloused hands and a sunburned neck. My father, Robert Caldwell, everyone called him Bobby, ran a landscaping company for 30 years. He started with a single beat-up truck, its engine rattling like it was about to give out, and turned it into a fleet of 20, servicing everything from tiny backyards to fancy golf courses. To him, a man's worth came from wielding a shovel, digging deep into the earth, and leaving his mark with sweat. Real work is something you feel in your bones, Ethan, he'd say, his voice low and solid like gravel rolling down the Cooper River. But that wasn't the path I wanted. I dreamed of numbers, algorithms, and a world where brains could build something bigger than perfectly trimmed lawns. I still remember the day I told my dad I wanted to study finance at the University of South Carolina. We were in the company's shed, the air thick with the smell of fresh-cut grass and motor oil. He stopped sharpening a mower blade, pushed his dust-caked safety goggles onto his forehead, and looked at me like I'd just said I was joining the circus. Finance? He smirked, a laugh that made me feel 2 feet tall. You think those computer games are going to put food on the table? You'll be back here with a hoe in your hand before summer's over. His words cut like a blade, sharp and cold, but I didn't argue. I just nodded, clutching the worn leather notebook in my pocket, the one he'd used to jot down every business plan since I was a kid. It wasn't just a notebook, it was his legacy, and I wanted to prove I could build something just as real, in my own way. My mom, Maggie Sullivan, was the only one who got me. She taught elementary school, scrimping every penny from her paycheck to fuel my dreams. The night before I left for Columbia, she slipped me $500, money she'd saved from selling cookies at the school fair. Do what makes you happy, Ethan, she whispered, glancing at my dad, who was glued to a football game on TV. But don't tell your father. I hugged her, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender perfume, and promised I wouldn't let her down. My dad? He handed me a $20 bill and said, "You'll find out soon enough how tough the real world is." That was his send-off. Things got worse last Memorial Day weekend. My dad threw his annual backyard barbecue, a Charleston tradition where he invited clients, employees, and extended family to show off his company. The yard was alive with the smell of grilled meat and hickory smoke, pure Southern vibes with ice-cold beers, star-spangled napkins, and country music blaring from a Bluetooth speaker. I'd just driven 120 miles from Columbia, still in a wrinkled polo from a school presentation. I walked into the yard, holding a plate of sliders my mom made, hoping to talk to my dad about the algorithm I was working on, a tool that could predict market trends better than the big firms. But as I approached, he was by the grill, spatula in hand, chatting with an old client. "This is Ethan, my boy," he introduced, his voice dripping with fake pride. "He's messing around with computers at school, but I bet he'll be back mowing lawns by next summer." The crowd roared with laughter, like I was the punchline to a bad joke. I stood there, my face burning, my hand tightening around the notebook in my pocket. "Dad," I tried, "I'm working on a project that could change how people invest." But he cut me off, pointing at the neighbor's lawn. "Look at that yard. Cut clean as a golf course. That's real work." The laughter erupted again, and I felt like I'd been erased. I turned and headed to the kitchen, where my mom was stacking potato chips on a platter. She looked at me, her eyes full of worry. "Don't take it to heart, Ethan," she said, resting a hand on my shoulder. "Your father, he's got his own way of showing things." But I knew it wasn't about showing. It was dismissal. I'd spent hundreds of hours in the library, coding, studying markets, dreaming of the day I could stand in front of my dad and say, "I made it." But here, in my own backyard, I was just the kid playing with computers, who'd never measure up. That wasn't the first time. Every time I came home, I got the same treatment. At Thanksgiving dinner, he introduced me to guests as my son, who's still figuring things out. At Christmas, he suggested I apply for a manager job at his company, since that tech nonsense isn't going anywhere. Each comment was a small cut, and I started wondering if he was right. Maybe I didn't belong in the world of numbers and screens. Maybe I should give up, grab a shovel, and become the man he wanted. But then I thought about my dad's notebook. I carried it everywhere, not because I needed to read the notes inside, revenue numbers,
plans for new trucks, but because it reminded me of the man who built something from nothing. My dad was a dreamer once, even if he wouldn't admit it. He'd taken out loans, worked 16-hour days, and turned one truck into a real business. If he could do that, so could I. I just had to do it my way. That night, after the barbecue, I drove back to my tiny apartment in Colombia. I sat at my desk, the laptop screen, the only light in the room. I opened my dad's notebook, flipping to the last page, where he'd scrawled a note 20 years ago. Nobody hands you success. You take it. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and kept coding. My dad might think I was a naive kid, but I'd show him who I was. Not by arguing, not by showing off. I'd let the truth do the talking. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Investors would turn me down. Long nights would wear me out. But I had something my dad didn't expect. Patience. I'd build something big. Not just for me, but for my whole family, even if they didn't believe in me yet. And when that day came, they'd see. Not because I rolled up in a fancy car, or wore a tailored suit, but because I did the right thing. My way.
After that barbecue night, when my father, Bobby Caldwell, turned me into a laughingstock in front of the whole family, I drove 120 miles back to my cramped apartment in Colombia, my heart heavy but my resolve burning brighter than ever. His words, "You'll be back here with a hoe in your hand before summer's over," echoed in my mind, not as a curse, but as a challenge. I opened my dad's worn leather notebook, flipping to the line he'd scrawled 20 years ago. "Nobody hands you success. You take it." Sitting in front of my laptop, the blue glow, the only light in the dark room, I told myself, if Dad could build a company from one truck, I can build an empire from numbers, and I'll do it my way. I knew the road ahead would be brutal. Investors would laugh in my face, call me a kid with no experience. Sleepless nights would test my limits, but I had something my dad didn't see coming: patience. I wasn't going to scream or show off to prove myself. I'd let my work do the talking, and so began my quiet journey. A journey not just to prove my dad wrong, but to build something bigger than he could ever imagine. I started in my shoebox apartment in Colombia, a place where the smell of instant noodles and stale coffee became my constant companions. The room barely had space for an old desk, a fold-out bed, and a whiteboard covered in math equations and flowcharts. On the wall I pinned a map of Charleston, marking the places I'd worked for my dad's company: lawns, gardens, summer days, sweating under 90-degree heat. The map wasn't just nostalgia. It reminded me that I knew the value of hard work, even if my dad thought I was just the kid messing with computers. My algorithm was my life's work, a tool that could analyze market data and predict trends with an accuracy even the big hedge funds could only dream of. The idea hit me during a finance class at the University of South Carolina, when my professor, Mr. Thompson, said the market isn't chaos. It's a puzzle, and whoever solves it changes the world. I spent hundreds of hours in the school library, poring over books on statistics, machine learning, and economics, searching for the missing piece. Most nights, I stayed up until 3 a.m., my eyes stinging from staring at the screen. But every line of code I wrote brought me closer to my dream. But dreams don't come easy. I quickly learned that a good idea was just the start. To make it real, I needed money, a lot of it. And to get money, I had to convince investors, people often decades older than me with no reason to trust a 20-year-old kid. I started attending startup conferences in Atlanta, Raleigh, and even Silicon Valley, wearing a cheap suit from a discount store, and carrying a PowerPoint presentation. I'd tweaked 100 times, but every time I got the same response: head shakes and polite rejections. "Nice idea, but you're too young. You need more experience. Come back in a few years." Each rejection email, I printed out and taped to my apartment wall, not to torture myself, but to remind me, these people don't believe in me, but they'll regret it. At a conference in Atlanta, I ran into Mark Ramsey, an old classmate from USC, who was now running his own tech startup. Mark had everything I didn't: sky-high confidence, a team of employees, and millions in funding. When I pitched my idea in a breakout session, he stood up, clapped slowly, and said to the room, "Not bad, Caldwell, but you're playing out of your league. Leave the big stuff to us." The crowd chuckled, and I felt the blood rush to my face. But I didn't snap back. I nodded, gave a tight smile, and thought, "Laugh now, Mark. You'll see." When I felt like giving up, I thought of my mom, Maggie Sullivan. She was the wind beneath my wings when everything got heavy. Once she sent me a handwritten letter with an old wristwatch, a graduation gift she'd bought with her savings. In the letter, she wrote, "Ethan, you don't have to prove anything to anyone but yourself. Be patient, like the Cooper River flowing through Charleston. It doesn't rush, but it always finds its way." I wore that watch every day,
the steady tick-tock reminding me, time's on my side if I don't quit. My best friend Will Tucker was another lifeline. Will and I met freshman year at USC, sharing a dorm room. He was the kind of guy who'd bring me food when I forgot to eat, proofread my pitch decks for typos, and never once doubted me. "You're the smartest guy I know," he'd say, slapping my shoulder.
Just don't forget us little people when you're a billionaire, all right? I'd laugh, but deep down, I knew if I made it, Will would be the first person I'd bring along for the ride. But I wasn't always strong. Some nights, I sat in my apartment, staring at the wall of rejection emails, wondering if my dad was right. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I should go back to Charleston, take a manager job at his company, and live the life he'd mapped out for me. In those moments, I'd open my dad's notebook, reading his notes. Revenue figures, expansion plans, the words "make it happen," scribbled in the margins. My dad had faced failure too. Banks denying him loans, clients ditching him, but he never gave up. Neither would I. A turning point came in my sophomore year, when Professor Thompson invited me to present my algorithm to a small group of investors. I prepared for weeks, practicing in front of a mirror, until I knew every word by heart. But standing in front of that crowd, men in tailored suits, with flashy watches and skeptical eyes, my heart pounded. I started my pitch, explaining how my algorithm could deliver bigger profits with less risk. Halfway through, an older man raised his hand, cutting me off. "How old are you, kid?" he asked, his tone dripping with doubt. 20, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He smirked. "Nice idea, but I don't bet on children." The room laughed, and it felt like a punch to the gut. But I didn't run. I finished my pitch, answered every question, and walked out with my head high. That night, I wrote in my dad's notebook, "They laughed today. They'll regret it tomorrow." That experience taught me something crucial. Success isn't just about the idea. It's about persistence. I started working twice as hard, 3 times as hard. I refined the algorithm, tested it with real-world data, and wrote detailed reports to prove its value. I reached out to dozens more investors, sending emails, making calls, even driving 300 miles to Raleigh for a 5-minute meeting that ended in another rejection. But every failure taught me something: how to pitch better, how to answer tough questions, how to stay calm when I was being dismissed. Through it all, I stayed in touch with my mom, even if just through quick calls. "You doing okay, Ethan?" she'd ask, her voice full of worry. "I'm fine, Mom," I'd always say, even when it was a lie. I didn't want her to know I'd lost 10 pounds from skipping meals or sold my old bike to pay the electric bill. But I told her about the algorithm, the small breakthroughs, and she always listened, always said, "I'm proud of you." Those words were the fuel that kept me going. With my dad, it was a different story. Every time I went back to Charleston, he found a way to cut me down. At a family dinner, when I tried to talk about the Atlanta conference, he interrupted. "Don't waste everyone's time with that pie-in-the-sky stuff, Ethan. Eat up. Your mom made killer ribs." My cousin Caleb Mitchell was the only one who showed any interest. "Sounds cool, Ethan," he said after dinner, as we stood in the yard. "Send me your report. I want to check it out." I smiled, grateful that at least one person in the family didn't think I was chasing a pipe dream. But moments like that were rare. Most of the time, I felt like I was fighting alone. I started logging every failure in my dad's notebook, not to wallow, but to turn them into fuel. I wrote March 15th, rejected by Apex Ventures. Reason: lack of experience. Plan: send thank you email. Ask for feedback. I wrote April 2nd. Mark Ramsey called me out of my league. Plan: beat him with results. The notebook became my journal, a place where I turned pain into purpose. Slowly, I realized this journey wasn't just about the algorithm or the money. It was about proving I could stand tall, no matter who doubted me. My dad was wrong to think I didn't have what it takes. Mark Ramsey was wrong to think I didn't belong in this world. And I'd show them, not with words, but with action. I'd build something that didn't just make them eat their words, but changed Charleston, my family, and maybe even the world. Have you ever been doubted by someone, only to prove them wrong with your actions? Drop a comment with the number 1 if you've overcome doubt to achieve something big, or 2 if you're still on that journey. We want to hear your story. Those long months in my cramped Columbia apartment, facing stacks of rejection emails and Mark Ramsey's taunts, forged me into someone more patient, sharper, and tougher. Every time I wanted to give up, my dad's worn leather notebook reminded me of the line he wrote 20 years ago. "Nobody hands you success, you take it." I'd worked relentlessly, refining my algorithm, sending hundreds of emails, driving thousands of miles for a shot. And then, one day, the door to success cracked open. Not with a bang, but quietly, like dawn breaking over the Cooper River. I knew it was time for the truth to speak, not just to investors but to my family, especially my dad, Bobby Caldwell, who always thought I'd crash and burn. Everything changed one April morning when I got an email from Blackwater Capital, one of the biggest hedge funds on the East Coast. The subject line was simple: interested in your technology. I read it 17 times, standing in my tiny apartment kitchen, my coffee going cold in my hand. They wanted to meet me in New York to discuss an exclusive licensing deal for my algorithm, at a price of $14 million. $14 million. The number was so big, I had to pinch myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming. But I didn't let the excitement take over. I called Will Tucker first. He screamed through the phone, so loud I had to hold it away from my ear. "You did it, Ethan. You actually did it." I laughed, but deep down I still heard my dad's voice. "You think those computer games are going to put food on the table?" I flew to New York 3 days later, carrying my only suit and my dad's notebook, like a talisman. The meeting with Blackwater took place in a Manhattan office, with windows overlooking a glittering skyline. Elizabeth Harper, the CEO, was a sharp woman with short silver hair and eyes that seemed to see right through you. "We've reviewed your test data," she said, tapping her fingers on the table. "It outperforms anything we've ever seen." "How'd you do it?" I explained, keeping my voice steady, about the sleepless nights, the failures, and how I built the algorithm from the ground up. When I finished, she smiled, a rare smile, like I'd passed an invisible test. "You're young," she said, "but you've got a vision most older folks don't." That night, Blackwater took me to a fancy restaurant where the menu didn't list prices. As Beth Harper raised her wine glass and said, "To the future of finance," everyone clinked glasses. I smiled, but all I could think about was my dad. I'd pictured this moment 100 times standing in front of him, telling him I'd made it, that I'd proved him wrong. But now, with the dream real, I didn't feel the thrill of victory. Instead, there was a strange emptiness. I wanted him to be proud, but I knew he wouldn't be. Not because he didn't love me, but because he couldn't admit that my way, the way of computer games, was right. I didn't call my dad to share the news. I didn't call my mom either, though I knew she'd cry with pride. Instead, I called Will. "You sitting down?" I asked, "because this is going to knock you over." When I told him about the deal, he screamed again, then said, "You gotta go back to Charleston and show everyone, Ethan, especially your dad." But I wasn't in a rush. I knew bragging wasn't my style. I wanted the truth to hit my family like a wave. Slow, unstoppable, undeniable. A few days later, while I was at my New York hotel, my cousin Caleb Mitchell texted, "Ethan, you just made the Wall Street Journal? You're famous." I opened my laptop, my heart pounding. There it was. A full-page article, headlined, "23-year-old founder lands 8-figure deal with Wall Street giant." They mentioned my age 3 times, like it was the most remarkable thing. But for me, what mattered was my name, my company, and my story, now out there for the world to see. I sat in the hotel room, staring at the New York skyline, emotions flooding in. Pride, sure, but also a deep sadness. I'd done it, but I knew my dad wouldn't acknowledge it. Not today, maybe not ever. I decided to let the truth speak for itself. I walked into a Ferrari dealership in Manhattan, wearing jeans and a t-shirt. The salesman eyed me like I was lost, until I mentioned I was looking in the $300,000 range. 2 hours later, I drove out in a blazing red Ferrari Roma. Not because I was crazy about sports cars, but because I needed a message my dad couldn't ignore. I didn't call ahead when I drove back to Charleston. I knew my dad's annual Memorial Day barbecue would be happening, where he invited everyone to show off his company. I timed my arrival for 2 p.m., when the backyard would be packed. As I pulled into the driveway, the engine's roar drew every eye before the car even came into view. I parked next to my dad's pickup truck, the one he was always so proud of, and took a deep breath. This wasn't about revenge. This was about being seen. I stepped into the backyard, holding nothing but my car keys. The chatter stopped, like someone hit pause. My mom, Maggie, clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes welling up. My dad stood by the grill, spatula frozen mid-flip. "Sorry I'm late," I said, walking toward him. Traffic from New York was brutal. He recovered fast, flashing the smile he used for clients. "Well, look who decided to grace us with his presence," he said, clapping my shoulder a little too hard. "Whose car did you borrow to make that entrance, son?" The guests laughed, and I felt the familiar heat creep up my face, but I didn't flinch. "Didn't borrow it," I said, my voice low. "It's mine. Bought it yesterday." He nodded, winking at my uncle Jim Wheeler, his business partner. "Right? And you're buying a private jet next week?" The crowd laughed again. I pulled the car title from my back pocket and handed it to him. His face shifted as he read it,
A flicker of hesitation. Then it hardened. He folded the paper, handed it back, and said, "Must be nice to have rich friends who trust you with their toys." He turned back to the grill. "It's missing me. Grab a plate. Your mom made killer potato salad." That moment hit me like a punch. What had I expected? A hug? An apology? Or just a look that said I wasn't the failure he thought I was? But there was nothing. Just the same old contempt, wrapped in a fake smile. The pride I'd felt from the $14 million deal evaporated, replaced by a deep disappointment. I'd done everything right, worked hard, stayed patient, acted with integrity. But to my dad, I was still the kid playing with computers. I stood there, amid the laughter and the smell of barbecue, feeling like a stranger in my own family. My mindset started to shift. At first, I just wanted him to see me, to see that I'd done what he said was impossible. But when he refused to acknowledge it, I realized the problem wasn't me. It was him. My dad, Bobby Caldwell, wasn't just stubborn. He was scared. Scared that if I was right, then his 30 years of life, long days sweating, trucks, perfect lawns, meant nothing. That realization didn't make me angry anymore. Instead, I felt a profound sadness, mixed with a touch of pity. He wasn't my enemy. He was a man trapped in the past. A week later, Caleb texted, "Uncle Bobby's telling everyone your deal fell through, saying you rented that Ferrari to show off." A cold certainty settled in my chest. Not anger, but clarity. My dad wasn't just dismissing me. He was trying to tear me down to protect himself. I checked into a downtown Charleston hotel, avoiding my parents' house. I met with lawyers, financial advisors, and started building a team for my company. But the rumors kept coming. Will texted, "Your dad came by the apartment, asking where your money's going." My aunt called. "Bobby told folks at church you're in legal trouble with those New York people. You okay?" Even Beth Harper from Blackwater reached out. "Someone claiming to be your father called our office, asking about the deal." We didn't share anything. My dad's actions stunned me. I thought he was just pig-headed. But now I saw desperation. I pictured him in his small office, fluorescent lights, buzzing, sifting through piled-up bills, trying to prove I was a liar. I imagined him on the phone, calling Blackwater, his voice trembling with fear that what he'd heard about me was true. His pride wasn't a shield for confidence anymore. It was a wall keeping him from facing reality. The world had changed, and he couldn't keep up. I drove to my parents' house one Tuesday afternoon, knowing my dad was at work. My mom opened the door, her hands shaking slightly as she poured coffee. "Mom, what's going on with Dad?" I asked. She sat down, clutching her mug. "He's worried about you, Ethan. Worried you're on the wrong path. Worried enough to tell everyone I'm a liar. To call my business partners?" She looked down. "Your success. It challenges everything he's built his life on. He doesn't know how to handle it." She hesitated, then added, "His company's struggling. Has been for years. The new landscaping chains are undercutting his prices. He can't compete." Her words hit like a freight train. My dad, the guy who bragged about his fleet of trucks and his reputation, was on the verge of losing it all. "Why didn't he tell me?" I asked. "Pride," she said simply. "The same reason he can't celebrate your success. If he admits your way worked, it means his way failed." Those words stopped me cold. I realized my dad wasn't just fighting me, he was fighting himself. Every jab, every rumor, was a desperate attempt to cling to the belief that his world, the world of real work, still mattered. I left my mom's house, promising to fix things, but something inside me had shifted. I didn't want my dad to acknowledge me anymore. I wanted to save him, not because he deserved it, but because it was the right thing to do. That night, I met my Uncle Jim Wheeler at a bar in downtown Charleston. He remortgaged the house, Jim said, staring into his beer. 3 years ago, poured everything into the business. New trucks, new gear, trying to keep up with the big dogs. "It's not working." "Why are you telling me?" I asked. He looked up. "Because yesterday he asked me if I thought you'd invest your computer money in the landscaping business. He's planning to talk to you." I sat back, stunned. My dad didn't believe my success was real, but he wanted my money. That contradiction hurt, but it also clarified something deep down. He knew I'd made it. He just couldn't say it. I drove by my dad's business that night. The lights were still on. I parked across the street, watching him through the window, hunched over paperwork. I saw a tired man, his hair flecked with gray, his shoulders sagging under the weight of bills and fear. I pictured him flipping through numbers, trying to save his company, each calculation leading to failure. I saw him glance at the photo on his wall, him at 20, standing by his first truck, grinning wide.
That photo was his dream, and now it was crumbling. For the first time, I didn't see my dad as someone against me, but as a man losing his own battle. The next morning, my dad texted, "Need to discuss a business opportunity. Dinner tomorrow, 7 p.m." I replied with one word, "Yes." But I didn't show up for dinner. Instead, I got to work. I called Beth Harper at Blackwater, asking for intel on landscaping companies in the Charleston area, ones being acquired or expanding. By noon, I had a list of the top 3 players in the region. By 3 p.m., I'd set up meetings with 2 of them. I also contacted a commercial real estate agent, looking for a warehouse in Charleston's old industrial district to serve as headquarters for my new company. I was bringing my dream home. My decision wasn't driven by anger or a need to prove myself. It came from a new understanding. My dad wasn't my enemy. He was part of me, and his legacy, whether he admitted it or not, had shaped me. I'd save his company, not to make him bow, but to show him we could build a future together, a future where both our ways had value. Have you ever helped someone who didn't believe in you? Drop a comment with the number 3 if you've done it, or 4 if you're working toward that moment. Share your story in the comments below. When I realized my dad, Bobby Caldwell, wasn't just fighting my success but grappling with his own failure, a new clarity settled over me. Watching him hunched over paperwork in his small office, under flickering fluorescent lights, I no longer saw an arrogant man. I saw someone losing his dream. His text, "Need to discuss a business opportunity. Dinner tomorrow, 7 p.m., wasn't an invitation to collaborate. It was a veiled cry for help. I replied, "Yes." But I didn't show up for dinner. Instead, I chose to act. Not to prove him wrong, but to save his legacy and our families. With my dad's notebook in my pocket, I set a plan in motion, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. I started with a call to Elizabeth Harper at Blackwater Capital, asking for intel on landscaping companies in the Charleston area, ones looking to expand or acquire. Within hours, I had a list of the top 3 players, led by Greenscape Enterprises, a juggernaut in the industry, with ambitions to dominate the southern market. I set up a meeting with Harold Jenkins, Greenscape's owner, at their North Charleston office. Harold was a middle-aged man with a warm southern drawl, but the sharp eyes of a seasoned businessman. "We've had our eye on Bobby Caldwell's outfit for a while," he admitted, after I laid out my intentions. "Good service area, loyal clients, but Bobby wouldn't talk to us. What if I could get him to change his mind?" I asked, my voice steady. Harold raised an eyebrow, then grinned. "If you can pull that off, we'll make him an offer he can't refuse." By the end of the day, I had a written proposal from Greenscape. They'd buy Caldwell Landscaping for $1.20 million, twice its current paper value, with a 5-year contract for my dad as regional manager, plus improved benefits for all his employees. It wasn't just a business deal. It was a way to preserve my dad's legacy while securing a future for the people who'd worked alongside him for years. At the same time, I signed a lease for a 15,000 square foot warehouse in Charleston's old industrial district, where I'd build the headquarters for my company, Horizon Analytics. I wanted to bring my dream home, not just to prove myself, but to create something lasting for Charleston. I called my cousin, Caleb Mitchell, who'd just graduated with a business degree. "You want to be Horizon's COO?" I asked. Caleb was floored. "You serious?" "I've never run anything." I laughed. "Neither had I. But you believe in what we're building. That's what counts." 3 days after my dad's text, I still hadn't responded to his increasingly irritated follow-ups. Instead, I walked into his office unannounced, carrying a folder. He looked up, anger flashing in his eyes. "So you finally show up, after standing me up," he said, his voice icy. I set the folder on his desk. "This is bigger than dinner," I said. He frowned. "What's this?" "Your big investment in my company." His tone dripped with sarcasm. "No," I said evenly. "It's a buyout offer from Greenscape Enterprises. They want to acquire Caldwell Landscaping." His face went pale, like I'd just sucker punched him. "You went behind my back," he growled. "I went ahead of you," I corrected. "Your company's failing, Dad. You and I both know it. This deal saves your legacy. Your employees keep their jobs. You get a regional manager role with profit sharing." He shot to his feet, trembling slightly. "This is your plan? Use your Wall Street buddies to steal the business I built?" I shook my head. "The business you built is dying. This saves it." He stared at the folder but didn't open it. I pulled a key from my pocket and set it on the desk. "One more thing," I said. "This is yours. The Ferrari key. Call it a gift." He glared at the key, his eyes narrowing. "I don't need your charity." "It's not charity," I said, heading for the door. "It's an advance bonus." I turned back. The offer expires in 48 hours. After that, Greenscape will go to your competitors. Think about your employees, Dad. Think about Mom. As I walked out, I heard the faint clink of him picking up the key. A small but heavy sound. The next morning, my mom texted, "Your dad drove the Ferrari today." Didn't say a word, but he drove it. I smiled, unsurprised. My dad was a practical man, even if he hid it behind his stubborn pride. That evening, he called Harold Jenkins at Greenscape. 24 hours later, they had a preliminary agreement. I kept my distance, saying nothing as my dad signed the papers to sell the company he'd built over 40 years. He looked smaller at the conference table, but when he walked out, the Ferrari key still in his pocket. His shoulders were straighter. I knew he wasn't ready to thank me, but his actions, signing the deal, keeping the key, were the first acknowledgement that I wasn't the failure he'd thought. Meanwhile, I got an email from a tech conference in Raleigh, where my rival, Mark Ramsey, had once mocked me. The organizers invited me as the keynote speaker, while Mark was relegated to the audience. Will texted, laughing through his message. "Ramsey's probably grinding his teeth somewhere." In a rare moment, I let myself savor that victory. Mark had called me out of my league, but now he'd have to sit and watch me shine. That was justice, without me saying a word. 2 months later, I stood on a makeshift stage at Horizon Analytics' new headquarters, a renovated warehouse in Charleston. Around me were 200 people. My employees, local business leaders, reporters, and my family. My dad stood in the back, arms crossed, still uneasy, in settings like this. "Today, we officially launch Horizon Analytics," I announced. "Our mission is to bring financial technology to everyone, not just Wall Street firms, and we're proud to do it right here in Charleston." The crowd erupted in applause. I went on, "We're also announcing our first local partnership. Horizon is investing $2 million in Greenscape Regional Holdings, the new parent company of several landscaping businesses, including the former Caldwell Landscaping." A murmur rippled through the crowd. My dad's head snapped up, his eyes sharp. "As part of this investment, we're launching a tech initiative to help traditional service businesses compete in the digital age," I said. "And I'm thrilled to announce that Robert Caldwell will lead this initiative as Director of Traditional Industries." The room exploded in applause. I looked straight at my dad. His face was stone, but I saw a flicker in his eyes. Not full acceptance, but reluctant respect. After the speech, as people mingled and celebrated, my dad finally approached me. "You planned this whole thing from the start," he said. "Not a question." I replied, "I planned to build something that mattered. The rest just fell into place." He looked around at the bustling employees, the sign bearing my company's name, the energy in the air. "Your name's not on the building," he noted. "Yours isn't either," I said. "But people know who built it." For the first time since I was a kid, I saw something like respect in his eyes. Not approval, we were past that, but acknowledgement. From one builder to another. He extended his hand. I shook it. "The Ferrari's staying with you," I said. "Call it a signing bonus." A faint smile crossed his face. "I sold it," he said. "Bought a new truck. Invested the rest in your company's stock." I nodded, not surprised. My dad was always a practical man, even if he hid it behind a tough exterior. I stopped looking for my dad's approval. I'd found something better. Purpose. Saving his company wasn't about bringing him down. It was about building a bridge between the past and the future. As I stepped off the stage, my dad's notebook still in my pocket. It felt heavier with what I'd added. June 1st saved Dad's legacy. Not for him, but for us. Have you ever turned someone's failure into a shared victory? Drop a comment with the number 5 if you've done it, or 6 if you're working toward making a difference. Share your story in the comments below. When my dad, Bobby Caldwell, shook my hand at Horizon Analytics headquarters, I stopped seeking his approval. That handshake, brief, firm, and for the first time free of sarcasm, was enough to tell me we'd achieved something bigger than a personal win. Saving his company, giving him a place in a future we could both share, wasn't about revenge. It was about building a shared legacy. But as I stepped off the stage, my dad's notebook still heavy in my pocket, I knew my journey wasn't over. I needed a moment to look back, to understand what it all meant. And I knew where I had to go. The banks of the Cooper River, where this story began, and where I'd find clarity. I stood on the banks of the Cooper River one late afternoon, the golden sunlight glinting off the rippling water. The breeze carried the salty scent of Charleston's harbor, mingling with the gentle lapping of waves and the distant hum of ship horns. This was the spot where I'd stood as a kid, holding my dad's hand, watching massive cargo ships head out to the world. He'd point at them and say, "Work hard, Ethan, and one day you'll build something as big as that." I'd done it, but not in the way he'd imagined. I pulled my dad's worn leather notebook from my pocket, flipping through its tattered pages filled with his scribbles of revenue, plans, and dreams. Beneath them were my own entries, marking failures, victories, and the moment I saved his legacy. The notebook wasn't just a keepsake. It was a bridge between my dad and me, between the past and the future. Looking out at the river, I thought about my journey. I'd started with a dream, an algorithm that could change how people invest, but I'd ended with something greater, a purpose. The years of my dad's mockery, Mark Ramsey's dismissal, and investors' rejections didn't just sharpen my mind, they shaped who I am. I used to think success was making my dad admit he was wrong, forcing Mark to eat his words, or getting the world to see me differently. But now, I understand that success isn't about beating others. It's about building something that matters for yourself, your family, and your community. My relationship with my dad has changed, but not in the way I once dreamed. We're not best buddies, sitting down over beers to swap stories about the past, but we have a new respect, an unspoken understanding that we're both builders, each in our own way. Last month, I saw him at a local business fair, standing with a group of carpenters and electricians, introducing them to me. "This is my son, Ethan," he said. "No jab attached. He's got some tech ideas that might help you guys out." It was the first time he'd called me son without a side of sarcasm. I nodded, shook hands with each guy, and started talking about software tools to help small businesses compete. As I left, my dad clapped my shoulder, a small gesture, but to me it was worth more than an apology. My mom, Maggie Sullivan, has retired from teaching. She used her savings and a small investment from me to travel. Her first trip was to Italy, where she sent me a photo of her grinning in front of the Colosseum. "Thank you, Ethan," she wrote on a postcard, "for bringing peace to our family." Her words made me realize my journey wasn't just about my dad and me. It was about giving my mom, who always believed in me even when I doubted myself, the joy she deserved. Horizon Analytics is now a cornerstone of Charleston. Our headquarters, a renovated warehouse, employs 50 locals, from software engineers to marketing staff. On the wall of our conference room, I had a phrase engraved: "Remember whose shoulders you stand on." It's a reminder that my success was built on the foundation of those who came before: my dad, my mom, Will Tucker, Caleb Mitchell, and even those who doubted me, like Mark Ramsey. I don't feel the need to prove anything to Mark anymore. He's faded from the game, outpaced by people like me, who didn't just have ideas but the patience to make them real. I still drive a modest sedan, not the Ferrari I gave my dad. One early morning as I left the office, I saw my dad pull up in his new pickup truck, parking beside my car. He stepped out, holding a coffee cup, and nodded at me. "Out early," he said. "Like me when I was your age." I smiled. Learned from the best. He didn't say more, just gave my car's hood a quick pat before climbing into his truck and driving off. That image, my sedan next to his truck, summed up everything we'd achieved. Not a perfect reconciliation, but a harmony, where we both had a place. Standing by the Cooper River, I thought about what I'd learned. Revenge isn't about tearing others down. It's about rising above their doubts to build something better. Justice isn't making your enemies beg. It's doing the right thing, even when they don't deserve it. And family isn't the people who always agree with you. It's the ones you choose to stand by, even when they once turned away. I wrote one final entry in my dad's notebook. July 15th, found my path, not to prove, to live. Thank you all for following my story on Revenge with Ethan. Your comments and support have fueled us to keep sharing tales of justice and dignity. If you love this journey, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next story. Have you ever found a deeper meaning in your journey? Drop a comment with the number 7 if you've turned hardship into purpose, or 8 if you're still searching for that path. Share your story in the comments below.